Welcome to the Fall 2014 Evergreen, Indiana Patron Services Roundtable. A Shakespearean tragedy? Defining damaged in Evergreen, Indiana. This program was originally recorded on October 30th, 2014 at the Indiana State Library. Damage is one of those not-so-fun things which can be very distressing when you're working at a library and you watch your materials come back not in the form in which you would have preferred they came back. With my sincere apologies to Shakespeare, we're going to massacre more than a few plays and sonnets over the course of today. Okay, so we don't currently have a definition of what is officially damaged in Evergreen, Indiana. We're going to begin by, I'm going to throw out a couple of definitions first to start with, and we'll see where we can go from there. I'm going to start by saying that damaged is something that you would call materials that are in a physical condition which would significantly impair a user's ability to enjoy or access the content and that exceeds local ability to improve. In other words, you can't fix it. If it is reparable, that means it's in poor physical condition, but it can be improved with locally available skills and supplies. So, we're going to start from that point and move forward. Whenever you handle materials, it is imperative that you take the time to look and inspect the materials. I know you've got thousands of things going through your desks every day, but any opportunity you can grab to go ahead and identify even minor issues is great, because the sooner you can catch, the sooner it can be fixed, and the less damage it's going to have in the long run. We have some very fun broken down materials here at the State Library because when minor damage happened and there was not a conservator on staff, materials were just let go as long as they were still usable. They were a little damaged, but still usable, but over time that damage grows and grows. All right, so while we're thinking about this, I'm not going to be able to talk about all the different kinds of damage that we covered in the survey, although I did use the survey to guide this discussion. But I want you to keep thinking during this conversation because we're going to ask you at the end of this to continue to provide us with additional feedback of different ways that you see material damage come into being and things that we can work on together to try to improve in workflows to help eliminate some of those. Obviously, patrons can be more creative in damaging materials than we sometimes give them credit for, but perhaps there's some simple step that we can implement that would ease the process of identifying damage quickly. When you are handling materials, whether it belongs to you or not, if you're doing transits, you need to make sure that you're looking for damage before and after transits and circulations. Okay, when you look for damage, it's important that you use your senses. You're going to look for visible damage, crushed paper, staining, things like that. You're going to touch. If you pick it up and it's wet, you will notice. Sticky, greasy, anything that doesn't feel like it's supposed to. Smell. There are a variety of foul odors that we all run across in our daily work. The best trick is to look out for the ones that indicate that there's a damage problem. And you're going to listen for the rattle of broken pieces inside that case. However, I do not recommend that you taste anything coming out of the drop box. So we're going to make this a bit of a quiz. Based on the quote here at the top of the screen, what kind of damage do you think I'm describing? Please go ahead and provide your answers in the chat box. This is an interactive training, and I want to know what you're thinking. Okay, we've got visible damage, folded and creased pages, crushed materials. I was thinking about drop boxes. Drop boxes. Our users love them because it gives them access to return materials because the library can't be open 24/7, but it's very hard on holdings. How many times have you seen someone walk up to a full drop box with the "I can make it fit" idea? Yeah, doesn't always work very well. Quick show of hands. Who all has come in from a holiday weekend to a drop box like this? It's amazing how much they can manage to squeeze in the door, even after it's trying to spit them back out onto the sidewalk, right? Yeah, the heaviest stuff is always on top, making sure it crushes whatever's most fragile on the bottom. What kind of problem do you think we have with this one? Spills, stains, soft drinks. Yeah, it's a mess. I'm going to start with the bodily fluids side of it, though, because they are a biohazard. If you do see materials back in your Dropbox or elsewhere that you are positive are contaminated, you will definitely want to get those out of your collection as soon as possible. Hopefully you aren't getting too many things back with quantities of blood on them, but it's surprising sometimes what people will return and the condition they will return it in. One thing that did come out in the survey was that when it comes to baby drool and spit up, we're more okay with that. We don't mind cleaning that one up so much. How do you know for sure? I would probably err on the side of overly cautious. If something comes back in with a red-brown stain, I would probably consider that as a possible blood contaminant. It could be chocolate, yes, absolutely, and then you might want to add the smell test. If it smells like chocolate, you're probably okay. But then you have chocolate in your books, and that speaks to another damage problem that we're going to be talking about in a minute. Does anybody have any good ideas on ways to test for bodily fluids? Yes, there are some scents that are unmistakable, thankfully. Or not, depending on who has to actually have the pleasure of handling the item. What kind of damage are we looking at with this quote? Nice! You guys are covering all my bases for me. Some of you are even a few steps ahead. Specifically at this point, I'm talking about ripped and torn content from a book or other materials. You could have ripped covers from DVDs, split seams on a puppet, etc. This is an example of a simple fix. When I talked to the conservator, she said to make sure to never use tape on archival items, but in public library settings, it's far more common for us to use tape for a quick fix on something like this. If you have more time and the resources, the conservator recommends a Japanese paper patch. Yes, and I wanted to remind everyone, even if it's a simple fix, if it's not yours, you should not fix it. You should send it back to its owning library for attention immediately. There are some legal ramifications with repairing someone else's property, and just to avoid there being any problems whatsoever, if something comes in with a little tear like this, go ahead and send it back to its home library. Japanese paper patching uses a lightweight specialized paper that you apply using starch paste, and it creates an almost invisible patch that doesn't leave the residues that build up and decay over time like you have with tape. Again, in the public library setting, if you know that it's not likely that this book is going to be on your shelf for more than another year, tape residues probably not that high on your list of priorities to worry about. Absolutely. One of these days we'll get Rebecca, the Indiana State Library conservator, to give some presentations. She's really busy actually doing conservation work right now, but hopefully we'll be able to make arrangements one of these days to get you more guidelines on the best ways to repair materials. When I looked at the survey results, there were a lot of, well, when it comes to tears and pieces in and out of materials, it really depends on how extensive the damage is. So in this example, we have a few pages that have been ripped out and folded. Due to varying forms of damage, this book is definitely ready to be discarded, but what do you think? If you had a situation like this where 3 pages had been torn loose, would you repair this book if that were the only damage to it? No? Okay. Whether or not an item is in print always makes a difference, I would imagine, when you're evaluating how much effort you're going to put into the repair. This one, which we will talk about again later, was returned in pieces in a full grocery bag, and in my opinion is not a reasonable candidate for repair in any way, shape, or form. Yes, Hussey Mayfield only saved it long enough to get some pictures to share so everyone could enjoy. Alright, here's the next kind of damage. Yes, we've got the creepy crawlies coming in. Very appropriate for the season, not so much for books. Depending on the type of insects you're talking about, there are a wide range of treatments. Many times, if you have books that are infested, depending on the extent of the infestation, you're going to want to discard them all together. But PDO has a workshop in development specifically on dealing with the creepy crawlies, and it should be available sometime in the new year. And everyone in the office itches every time we talk about it. But it's amazing what such tiny creatures can do to materials. This is an example of termite damage. This is probably a bit more extreme, hopefully, than any of us will see in person, but this is how bad it can get. Bookworms, bed bugs. I wanted to show cockroaches in here because I know we get them, but I couldn't find any pictures because apparently when things are full of cockroaches, either people run away, throw the items away, or start killing the bugs rather than take pictures. Maybe Bill and team will have had better luck. We'll find out. Ew, silverfish? Ugh. It happens, though. If your books are out there, there are critters that are going to find their way in, and it's just part of dealing with the damage process and determining what can be saved and what cannot. Oh, good. Bill's got you covered. Okay. Back to damage. What's going to cause this type of damage? Yeah, dogs are prescient that way. Amazing, isn't it? In reviewing the survey results and everything else that I've read, if you have chewing damage from animals, the items are generally a loss. They just have to be damaged out. And this one is more commonly assigned to patrons, where we do bill, because there's no question that it was sitting on your shelf in a half-chewed state, thankfully. There's one common exception, but we'll get to that in a minute. I got mixed results on teething babies. Generally, if it's just a few dents, you'll clean it up and put it back on the shelf. But consensus, too, was that someone who is a repeat offender who's doing serious damage will be billed. So again, we're back to this image from Hussey Mayfield. This was the result of a puppy who was a little too enthralled with a book. I personally got a real kick out of the fact that he chewed the cover off of Love Undercover. And rats. Now, if you happen to put part of your collection in storage for some reason, or if you have an attic or basement space where you have materials set back, you do run the risk of rodent infestation. And rodents will not hesitate to eat your books, or they'll chew on just about anything else you leave out. So that is something else to keep under consideration. This one is probably less likely to be patron billed, as there is potential for this to happen in-house, but not necessarily. Okay, moving along. What problem do we have here? Yep, you guessed it. This is probably the #1 cause of frustration I hear between libraries when they send and receive transits. When I sent it, it was all in one piece and fine. Then I got it in and the thing was falling apart. Now, there are a lot of things that can happen. Impact trauma, because other books land on top of it and hit it just wrong. Change in humidity, because you're moving between locations, can cause the glue to come loose. The age of the item plays a role. All of which is in addition to the wear and tear of normal patron use. Very frustrating. To help mitigate this whenever possible, if you're prepping books to send them out, or when you're prepping materials, generally, be sure to fan the pages to make sure that none of them are actively loose before you ship them. And if you find something that needs mending, don't hesitate. Always go ahead and mark it mending, even if it's already been captured. The hold will wait. We can either find another copy or let the patron wait a couple of days while you get that fix in. Because what we really, really want is for the patron to have a good experience. It's very frustrating for them too if the book comes and then you have to tell them, well, it's here, but you can't have it because it has to go back to its owning library for repair before I can circulate it to you. Go ahead, mend it now, and then we can get it back out and circulating. This is an example of an item from Peabody. It was actively damaged in transit. It was packed together unsecured with a hardcover book, which they got jostled around in the packaging, and the hardcover book actually split out the paperback. If you look at the middle of the binding, you can see where there's another section of pages that are just about ready to come loose, in addition to the ones that are fully loose in the back. All of the pages arrived at this point, so the book was probably in reasonable condition when it left the library. But in this case, it was actual transit damage, rather than the library not completing repairs correctly. The rubber bands issue, we're talking about that a lot. We've talked about that in most of the regional roundtables this fall. I'm still in talks with Mike Hicks, who's the head of the Info Express program here at the State Library, and we're trying to figure it out. He's working on a presentation for best practices, and we're probably going to be talking at the Patron Services Committee in December about options for setting up specific guidelines or recommendations. I would definitely recommend that if you have some opinions and ideas that we talk about that during the discussion portion of the meeting after the presentation, because I've heard some people are collecting some really, really big rubber band balls. Okay. Who knew Shakespeare was so forward-thinking? Well, the one thing he didn't actively talk about were DVDs and CDs, so I put all of that into one section here. You've got your audiobooks, music, film, and software discs. They're delicate. They're fragile. There are so many ways in which they can be damaged. Thankfully, the cases that we provide usually take the brunt of the damage, but then the cases themselves are destroyed and have to be replaced. I do have a question for you. I know that several of the libraries own disk repair machines. If your library does, can you give a good description of how you feel this has impacted your need to replace disks? How often have you been able to save disks which otherwise were unplayable? Yeah, I know there was a recent discussion on one of the listservs. I don't remember if it was in PubLib or one of the Evergreen lists about the different models that are out there right now. Oh, that's excellent. Yeah, and if all 212 of those were not usable before you put them in the machine, that's impressive. All right, Laura's got her stats right to hand. Okay, well, I'll let you go ahead and throw up your model information if you have it available. A couple of examples I've found for visuals. We've got cracks, scratches. Obviously, a scratch like this, machines are not going to take it out. This example was provided by one of the member libraries. This was damage they received on a disk recently. They're not entirely sure what happened. It was either heat damage or the item was dipped in a corrosive chemical. In either case, it actually melted the edge of the disk and unbalanced it. So even if the data had been preserved, it was no longer safe to put into a machine, because this is the kind of damage you'd get at on the other side. Don't terribly often see them coming out of machines like this, but I've seen a few that have been run over in cars that were in bits. Okay, our next kind of damage. This is a pretty common one. Yep. I'm amazed how often I see young artists' efforts to improve upon an illustrator's work. And in my experience, scholars do tend to annotate texts when the opportunity presents itself. Oh, that wasn't very helpful. Negative review in the front. Does your library actively classify writing or drawing in books as damaged? I don't have an image for this one, but I will go ahead and ask, has anyone here had problems with patrons censoring texts? They censor with Post-it notes? You have very civilized patrons, Virginia. Wow. Well, that's an interesting step to take. As a censorship method, but for students, I've definitely seen that before, where they want to remember where it was that they wanted to get back to. Oh, I used to hate that. And not just the GED. They used to do it to all the test prep books. The SAT books used to be really bad back when I was in high school. Yeah. Okay, well, it sounds like consensus is minor writings are just dealt with in-house, and the survey results I know were relatively consistent with that. Okay, moving along. What kind of damage are we talking about now? Yeah, food, food, food. I put this in and then realized you might not all have heard of it. Is there anyone here who hasn't heard about someone using a raw piece of bacon as a bookmark? It was making the rounds for a while, but yeah, someone pulled a book out of the Dropbox, opened it up, and a piece of raw bacon that someone had used as a bookmark left a lovely residue and completely destroyed the book. But while that's an extreme case, obviously, in my experience, it's not at all uncommon to find food remnants in books, whether it's chocolate smears, coffee stains, or more extreme examples. In the survey, though, I had some libraries comment on that particular point, saying you could just wipe it down or dust off the item. So how do you gauge when you need to discard it? Because I've seen cookbooks all of the time that have food in them. Batter, I found one that had meringue in it once. The bacon bookmark book? I don't remember what kind of book it was. You could probably find pictures if you look online, though. And we will talk a little bit at the end of the presentation about noting damage. Yeah, I would hope if you got this one in, you'd discard it. Okay, well, definitely something else to think about when considering food damage is the potential to attract the creepy crawly pests or rodents. If you had an item, as we spoke about earlier, with chocolate in it, that chocolate is going to attract any insect that's attracted to sugar. And that could easily include ants or cockroaches. Just something to keep in mind. And certainly if you got a rodent in your building, they're going to seek out the areas that smell like food. As Anita noted, however, all of this has to be done at your library, and you have to determine what you're willing to risk and what you're comfortable sharing. Just try to keep everything in mind when you're making your local plans and procedures for things like that. All right. We're on to our next type. Yep. Tobacco smoke. If someone accidentally overdoes with the aftershave or the perfume, mold, pet odors. Are there any others? Okay, you have food smells, the mystery smells. Those are always fun. Any others you see consistently in your communities? Okay. And what methods do you use to deal with smelly materials? I know you said where there was pet spray, several of you mentioned you had to just damage it out. It was not worth trying to even save those. Baking soda, dryer sheets, air freshener, bleach for anything plastic. Anyone here ever put stuff out in the sun to air? Yeah, plastic can be tough because it will absorb the scents and hang on to them for a long time, unfortunately. All right, we've got a long quote for this one. Generally, if something is seriously liquid damaged, there's just no saving it. It's a complete write-off. But how many of you have had a patron come in with the book still dripping and say, "I swear it was like that when I checked it out"? Yeah. Let's protect it with plastic. Oh no, it won't hurt them. It's just water after all. Everyone knows librarians like to shelve their materials in the swimming pool. Fair point. You can still read that page. Generally, with freezing, you need a commercial model freezer that gets much colder than residential models, but it can be done with the proper equipment and is expensive and difficult. Laura, depending on the extent of the coffee spill, a drop or two of coffee staining one page versus soaked to the spine with discoloration throughout, I would contact the owning library and find out if they wanted you to just go ahead and damage it out on the spot. Wet leads to mold, and mold is a disaster in libraries. But you definitely do not want to send wet materials back through Info Express because that could end up damaging everything else in the bag and in surrounding bags. Oh, that's frustrating. This one may be a bit more challenging to guess. What is the probable problem? I think I should have used this quote for a different slide then, because we're getting a lot about age. And age is a part of damage, and it's something you cannot avoid. Time passes, paper gets brittle, ink fades, glue dries out and comes unstuck. It's definitely part of damage. But what I was actually aiming for was the decay aspect of this, and specifically mold. When mold gets into your collection, into a single item, or into whole areas of your library, it's a death knell. I spoke with Rebecca in preparation for this class and asked if there was any scenario in which a limited amount of mold in a book is okay. And there was absolutely no question. Her immediate response was no. If there is any mold active in a book, it should be discarded immediately before it can do damage to the rest of your collection. Now, there are techniques for removing mold from extremely valuable materials. If you have an item that is one of a kind and priceless for your community, you may want to research your options. But she told me that there are less than 5 conservators in the US right now that will actively treat a mold problem. And it can run into thousands of dollars per item. So if you do have something that you really want to have that done, you can contact us at the State Library and we can put you in touch with some places that might be able to assist you if you have something that you absolutely must recover from a moldy state. This is another item image contributed by a member library. This particular book got wet, was allowed to dry, and then it came to life. This is a somewhat extreme example. This was just thrown in their book drop though, so they had to clean everything in the book drop, obviously. That's just icky. Has anyone here ever tried to clean mold before? Nope. And typically that's true. If something has gotten wet, chances are good it will have had time for mold spores to settle and begin the process of growing. That's part of why I paired these two damage types, is because how do you know mold from other kinds of stains? Well, smell is usually a good way to get started. There's that mildewy, earthy smell that you get with mold. I will ask the community, but my general thought would be that if you aren't sure, you probably just want to go ahead and replace the item. If there's a chance, what's really important is that you don't put that questionable item back on your shelf, because it could easily infect the books around it. And if you cruise around online, I've been using all Creative Commons and submitted graphics for this presentation. But if you look around online and search for moldy books, there are some truly horrifying collections out there where there are whole shelves that have grown a coating of fuzz when one book got infected and it spread to the others. Sometimes whole ranges of shelves. So if you're wanting to get good and icked out, there are opportunities out there and mold brings them to you. Okay. Whenever you can and you have the available resources, we do encourage you to make repairs on your items as early in the process as possible. But I would remind you that your staff time is a finite resource, so you need to consider that in your equation. Now, if you have to completely rebind it, get all new equipment, it might be time to just find a new copy. On the Evergreen side of things, the way the database looks at it, if we damage out an item that's on a patron record, the patron is billed for the full cost of the item, plus processing fees, and the damaged status removes the item from your circulating collection as available. It will not appear in the catalog to end users. Staff can still see it, though, until you choose to delete it. If you damage out an item that you find on your shelves, or maybe a DVD that was smashed because it was at the bottom of the pile after a holiday weekend in your Dropbox, you're not going to charge the patron for that because it's not their fault that the item was smashed by the children's manual. In that case, after you check it in, then you would damage the item out in item status. There's no bill assessed, but the item is again removed from your circulating collection. Repair is a new manual billing type that we put into effect earlier this year, and we do recommend that you use this anytime you'll be able to fix it and the patron needs to pay a sum against the repair costs. It's definitely a lower cost because if you're charging up to the price of the item, you should just go ahead and simply damage the item out. This may also be useful for replacement parts, which we won't have a chance to get into today. And when you get damaged materials, which you will receive, whether it's in transit or back from a patron, if it's yours, get it to the appropriate staff member for attention. If it's not yours, you're going to want to make sure that the owning library is fully aware of the situation as early in the process again as possible. If it looks like the item can be mended, contact the library and have them set the item status to mending, and then it will transit back to them immediately without going to another patron, which has happened with some high demand items where an item was damaged 2-3 patrons back and the paperwork got misplaced in the meantime. So go ahead and contact the library. That library can change the item's status to mending or bindery, and it will immediately ship back to its owning library. Hussey Mayfield actually had a custom stamp built that they're using and that they've shared today. You've probably seen this in practice, and I know several others of you have said that you have something similar that you're doing where you attach a note to the item. This is an example, and the Patron Services Group is actually working on coming up with a shared form for the libraries to use that would work in a similar fashion to this. So if you have any ideas, let us know. This particular stamp is for transit damage, but maybe you'd like to see other fields for reparable patron damage. You know, for when the item comes back and while the patron had it out, they happen to crack the case. If you're not the owning library, you can't place that bill. For that, you need to notify the owning library and they can bill appropriately, and preferably before the item is off the patron's account. We're just about to the end of the official presentation. The Patron Services Committee will be talking about this issue in December and reviewing everything that you've shared to date, because we're going to try to come up with a minimum set of standards for how materials should present in Evergreen. I know it is different from library to library what you consider damaged, but we're going to try to come up with a few guidelines just so that no one's thrown for a complete loop when something comes in and it doesn't fit their local standards at all. This way they will have an idea if this is still acceptable in Evergreen and whether to go ahead and move forward with the transaction. If you have any initial ideas that you aren't able to contribute today because you, think of them tomorrow, or they come up in conversation with a coworker, please let us know. You can contact me, or you can contact any of the Patron Services Committee members. This is my contact information. Thank you everyone for participating so much. I know this was a very interactive program and I really enjoyed getting to talk and share with all of you.